You all know about volcanoes, right? Those big mountains shaped like a cone filled with this very hot and thick flowing substance called magma. Every once in a while, somewhere on Earth, a volcano will erupt and spew out this magma, which we then call lava. These eruptions could be hazardous, dangerous, deadly, and even have an effect on the whole world. But what is the largest volcano eruption the world has ever seen? Welcome to I Know, and in this video you will learn about the largest volcano eruption ever recorded in human history. Volcanic eruptions have been some of the most powerful and destructive events in human history. Volcanoes have shaped our landscape, affected climate, and caused mass destruction. Currently, there are more than 1,500 active volcanoes on Earth, and about 50 to 70 volcanoes erupt every year. When we talk about the largest eruption in history, it is not just about the casualties. It is also about how powerful the eruption was, its effect on climate, and all the damage it has done, including the effects on our health and more. To measure how strong a volcanic eruption is, we have created a scale called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, the VEI for short. The scale ranges from 0, the lowest, to 8, the highest, and thus the most colossal. When you think about the largest possible volcanic eruption ever, a lot of you will probably say Mount Vesuvius, which happened in the year 79 and had about 16,000 casualties with a VEI of 5. Others might think of the supervolcano Yellowstone, which last erupted about 640,000 years ago, or of the eruption of Krakatau in 1883 with a VEI of 6, which, among other things, caused a tsunami that killed over 36,000 people. But the largest volcanic eruption recorded in human history is actually the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 in the country of Indonesia. The island of Sumbawa in Indonesia is where we can find Mount Tambora. Before the eruption, Mount Tambora was about 14,100 feet tall, making it one of the tallest peaks in the Indonesian island groups. But after the explosion, the peak elevation had dropped to just under 10,000 feet, about 2/3 of its previous height. This already tells us that it was a very large eruption. Now, let's take a look at the eruption itself chronologically. Before 1815, Mount Tambora was a so-called dormant volcano, meaning that it has not erupted in a long time but may erupt at a future time. But then, in 1812, the volcano began to rumble and generated a dark cloud, and in the early evening on the 5th of April 1815, a first eruption took place. It was a giant eruption, followed by thunderous detonation sounds which could be heard over 800 miles away. The next morning, on the 6th of April, ash began to fall in East Java, with faint and less frequent detonation sounds lasting until the 10th of April. Then, at about 7 p.m. on the 10th of April, the eruptions intensified. The whole mountain quickly turned into a flowing mass of liquid fire. Volcanic stones started to pour down at about 8 p.m., followed by ash between 9 and 10 p.m. And violent winds, which uprooted trees and other exposed objects, blew without stopping between 10 and 11 p.m. Lava flows poured down the mountain, wiping out the village of Tambora completely. Loud explosions were heard until the next evening on the 11th of April. The ash curtain spread as far as West Java and South Sulawesi. In a large area within about 300 miles of the volcano, the sky remained pitch dark for 1 or 2 days. And the air at first became very hot and then cold. A bad odor was noticeable in Batavia, the capital city back then. The shower of ash finally ended between the 14th and 17th of April. Enormous rafts of volcanic stones mixed with ashes and uprooted trees floated across the sea. Some of these rafts were several miles big and close to 3 feet thick. A devastating eruption, to say the least. The explosion had a VEI of 7, which is described as super colossal. An estimated 10 cubic miles of volcanic stones were ejected, weighing about 10 billion tons. The explosion left a caldera measuring from 3.5 to 4.5 miles across and over 3,000 feet deep. This eruption in 1815 is the largest observed eruption in recorded history. But it doesn't end there. After a catastrophic eruption, the aftermath might be the worst of all. On the island, all vegetation was destroyed. Clouds of thick ash still covered the summit on the 23rd of April. Even though explosions stopped on the 15th of April, smoke emissions were observed until the 23rd of April. 4 years after the event, in August 1819, flames and rumbling aftershocks were still reported. But still, it doesn't end there. Because of the eruption, multiple tsunamis struck the shores of multiple islands. The biggest one happened on the 10th of April, with the tsunami having a height of up to 13 feet. The eruption column, which is a cloud of superheated ash and rock ejected into the air during an explosive eruption, reached our stratosphere at a height of more than 141,000 feet. Some ash particles fell out of the sky 1 to 2 weeks after the eruption, but finer ash particles stayed in the atmosphere from a few months to a few years. Wind spread these fine particles around the globe, creating optical phenomena, which are any observable events that resulted from the interaction of light and matter. In London, for example, beautiful sunsets and twilights, which appeared orange or red near the horizon and purple or pink above, were frequently seen around the summer of 1815. Months after the eruption in Indonesia, it is difficult to know the exact number of deaths caused by the eruption and its aftermath, but the number is estimated from at least 71,000 to about 100,000. And again, this is still not the end. The eruption caused global temperatures to drop, which is also known as a volcanic winter. During the summer of 1816 in the Northern Hemisphere, countries suffered from extreme weather conditions, and the temperature dropped almost 1 Fahrenheit, or about half a degree Celsius. Enough to cause significant agricultural problems around the world. This caused about 90,000 deaths. The year 1816 is also known as the year without a summer. Not specifically because of Mount Tambora, but it definitely had its influence on the temperatures. In the spring and summer of 1816, a persistent dry fog was observed in the United States. The fog dimmed the sunlight and also turned it red. Even wind and rainfall could not disperse the fog. The weather became so bad that in Northern America in the summer, in places like New York, it was freezing and snowing. And on the 8th of June 1816, Vermont was covered in snow about 16 feet deep. These weather conditions occurred for at least 3 months and ruined all of the crops in North America. This was the second coldest year in the Northern Hemisphere since around the year 1400. This was all caused by Tambora's eruption in 1815 and possibly by another VEI 6 eruption a few years prior to Tambora. In Europe, these climate changes caused the Indian season winds, also known as the Indian monsoons, to be disrupted, caused 3 failed harvests and thus food shortages, and even contributed to the spread of cholera in 1816. In New England, many livestock like cows died in the winter of 1816-17. In Wales, families traveled long distances as refugees begging for food. The food shortages were really bad in the United Kingdom because of failed harvests, but also in the rest of Europe. Food prices rose sharply, and that caused demonstrations, followed by riots, arson, and looting in many European cities. It was the worst food shortage of the 19th century. If an eruption like this were to happen today, the effects could be a lot worse and lead to more casualties. But what is the chance of this, and what is the current status of Mount Tambora? As of today, Mount Tambora is still active, and the last eruption was in 1967. But increased seismic activity occurred lastly between 2011 and 2013. But it is unlikely that an eruption like the one in 1815 will happen again soon. The volcano needs to recharge for an eruption like that to happen again, and that could take up to at least thousands of years. So, you have nothing to worry about. Even though you don't have to worry, what would happen if an eruption like that happens? Well, for starters, a lot of people will die. And since the global population grew about 8 times since the 1800s, you could expect the number of casualties to be about 8 times bigger too. If Mount Tambora were to erupt right now, the local inhabitants can do nothing about it, because with an eruption of that size, total evacuation is impossible. Effects of an eruption would be felt for years around the world. Climate disturbance will combine with economic disruption to cause misery and political instability all around the world. It would be a destructive, disastrous event if this were to happen. It would hurt all of us. We have come to the end. Now you know pretty much everything you need to know about the largest volcanic eruption ever recorded in human history. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I will see you again in another video.